Frontline Conversations, leading the debate since 1984.
Hello and welcome to Frontline. I'm Nirupama Subramanian. Prime Minister Modi has just returned after a bilateral visit to the United States, the fourth world leader that President Donald Trump has met quickly off the blocks of his second term, after the leaders of Israel and Japan and the King of Jordan. The visit has been hailed by supporters of the Modi government and even independent observers as a success, with a CNN reporter even calling it a masterclass in how to negotiate with President Trump. And many have said that both sides have got outcomes out of this visit. Critics have seen it as India surrendering to Trump's show of power. To understand this visit better, with us today is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former ambassador to France and currently Dean and Professor at the OP Jindal Global University. Welcome, Ambassador Mohan Kumar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nirupama Subramanian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me just begin by asking you that, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has visited the United States several times, 10 times, I think, in the last 10 years. Each time, the welcome was such as to make India and Indians feel that their country is an equal of the US. Many even, in casual conversations, many people in India support the view that, India is now a superpower, not even a rising power, that it has become a superpower. And in fact, over the last 2 decades, even ties with the US have improved so much that there was this impression of India taking its place, its rightful place at the high table of the world, from which it had been excluded for so many decades. But that was not the impression that this visit created. Even in terms of optics, President Trump didn't come to the porch to receive Prime Minister Modi like he did for the Prime Minister of Japan, Benjamin Netanyahu, or even the King of Jordan. Has Trump shown India, the world's 5th largest economy, its place through his show of power?
So my brief answer to that question is no, because the other 3 leaders who have made trips to Trump so far are allies of the United States. So I would argue by saying that while I cannot say he's the first leader from Asia because Japan is part of Asia, but really this is the first major non-ally, if you like. And he's the Prime Minister of India who has made a trip. That's the first point I would like to make. The second point I would like to make is you really cannot divorce the way Trump is dealing with Modi with how Trump is dealing, let's say, with Canada, with Mexico, EU, Jordan, even the kind of things he said in front of the Jordanian king, and you could see that the Jordanian king was uncomfortable and wincing and all that. So I think that's the second point. The last point really is that each leader, I think, brings to the White House a certain style. I would say that, listen, I don't want to be, go by optics. I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I agree with you, that remains to be seen because he has just begun his tenure. But 2 things I would say in answer to your question. It's very hard to see this meeting as anything other than a successful one from India's perspective. Second, I think we have avoided disasters in the sense of there being no blood on the ground. That's what I said in my blog. A lot of things could have happened. He could have made some off-the-cuff remarks and so on. So I think both leaders stayed true to the script. As an ex-diplomat, for me, that is crucial. I think the joint statement, we will get into it in your other questions. I think it's a very substantive joint statement. I have really compared it line by line with the Biden visit, the last one, 2024, when they had a joint statement. So I have no reasons, at least no substantive reasons, to think that this visit was anything other than a success.
So, if this was a success, one of the developments, if the visit was a success, one of the developments during the visit itself was that even as it was taking place, even as they were talking and as the press conference was happening, perhaps, Indian illegals were being boarded onto a US military aircraft and being shackled and chained for their journey back to India. And India has accepted that illegals have no place in another country. Illegal immigrants from India have no place in any other country, and that they should be sent back. But it seems that either the Indian side did not take up the issue of transporting them back humanely, I mean, without those chains and shackles and all that, with the Trump administration, or they were asked to lump it. What do you think actually happened?
So I think there has been a shift. So I concede that. But the way I would argue this shift should have happened 15 years ago, frankly. I mean, you had a whole ecosystem in India which was actually taking these people for a ride, getting huge amounts of money. It was illegal. There is no question about it. And for the government of India to turn a blind eye, which is what previous governments did, was not something that I was comfortable with. And I've served in Bahrain, as you know. So I am personally extremely happy that this Prime Minister, current Prime Minister, has chosen to say that illegal migration is not something that India will support, and it should not have a place in the relationship. Even more so when you are pushing for legal migration. You know, you are saying we want legal migration to stay in place, H-1B, etc., etc. So with what face do you then say it's okay for 7 lakh people who have migrated illegally from Punjab and other parts of India? So that's the first point I'd like to make. On the issue of shackles and so on, my sense is that if we are being discriminated against compared to other countries, I think we should take it up. But if that is the procedure, then I don't think we have too much, frankly, scope for complaint, frankly, because you'll have to see how the others are being dealt with. And accepting illegal migrants, by the way, I must tell you, is no easy matter, because we will have to confirm that they are Indian nationals. And this was clearly being dissuaded in the past by governments who would tell us, don't do it, let them go. I mean, I've heard this being told to me officially. That was, I'm talking about 10 years, 15 years ago. And that was not right, frankly. You know, I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And the reason given was there was one Pakistani who managed to slip through our net. You see, among all the people that we confirmed, one person from Pakistan, I think, must have told the consular official that, listen, I am from India. And he managed to come in. This was a fact. This also happened 14, 15 years ago. But then instead of tightening those procedures to kind of say that, listen, turn a blind eye and don't bother too much about it, why do you want them back? I thought that was wrong in principle and terrible in practice, because it's not like other countries don't know about it. So I would say, frankly, to your question, that this shift in policy is welcome. This will have a deterrent effect in many people now not spending 50 lakhs and trying to take the donkey route or whatever you call it. My also point in response to your assertion that we either sucked it up or lump it, or we did not take it up. My sense is that Mr. Jaishankar raised it with Marco Rubio. That is my sense. I'm not sure about whether Prime Minister Modi raised with the President Trump or not, but I'm absolutely certain that one of the things that certainly the External Affairs Minister did was to raise it with Mr. Marco Rubio, and that I think we're kind of telling them that, listen, there are better ways to do this. But as someone wrote in the press, I can't remember who, perhaps the time has come for us also to send aircrafts to get these people. After all, you did that for your for your students in Ukraine and other places, and this is a more serious issue. So maybe we can think of that as well, and that might solve some problems. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. But on the whole, responding to your point, I would say that this shift in policy is very, very welcome. It will strengthen the Indian government's hand when we talk to these countries, not just the US, but other countries, about legal migration.
But 2 points here. One is that the whole episode reflects a complete lack of empathy about why these people actually go. They go because there are no jobs in India, right? And they need to better their lives. So it's all right for people like us to sit and discuss that, okay, we should go only on H-1B when we have an education, when we go to IITs, when we have some kind of professional qualifications that make us more able to find work, proper work, and a legal route to migrate. But we are, as a country, we have not been able to provide jobs. We have not been able to provide proper education to people, and which is why they migrate. And that is what is completely missing in this conversation. And don't you think that there ought to be a little empathy in how we deal with this instead of saying, let's crack down? I mean, it seems to me that we are treating victims of a particular system as the criminals, as somehow responsible for their own fate. And that is not, that doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth.
I agree in principle, but it's hard to have empathy for someone who spends 50 lakhs, because you could very easily open a shop or do something with that 50 lakhs and be an entrepreneur, because you were really, rigging and gaming the system at both ends. So I don't have sympathy because of the 50 lakh factor. And you might say they sell land and they sell the family silver, but that is their choice. So I have no sympathy. If you have somebody from Kerala or Telangana working as a maid in the Gulf, I would have more sympathy for obvious reasons. That is a different issue. This is a far, far different issue. Many of them have called their relatives in Punjab and told them, excellent news, I have been picked up by the American security or law enforcement. Now I will get asylum. That is absolutely unacceptable, Nirupama. Because when somebody seeks asylum, the only way you can justify it is by saying my life is under threat in Punjab. So that is unacceptable to me. I think the two factors that make it unacceptable and perhaps difficult for me to have empathy is the 50 lakh factor. And the second factor is a lot of them will seek asylum. And that for me is virtually telling the government of India that you cannot protect my life and therefore I am going, which between you and me is a lie, because none of these people have any threat to their life. So I think it's a complex phenomenon. I agree with you that there are some strong push factors from India, but also please, when you empathize with them, empathize also with the American government. Why do you think they should take all these people from India? Then Africans will start saying, why don't you take me? I have no jobs. So this business that I have no jobs and therefore I need to get out, and that it is my right to bend rules and go somewhere as an economic migrant is a difficult argument in the best of circumstances. But in the world in which we live, there is clearly an anti-immigrant sentiment, and you know this in the West. I think it becomes unsustainable. That's just my personal view, by the way.
Well, I mean, there could be, I don't want to argue with you on this, but I just want to make the point that the US is supposed to be the land of the free, and everybody is a migrant there. And, it is built on the work of the labor of migrants. So obviously there is an expectation of a welcome, which is no longer there. As you're saying, the world is now loaded against migrants, even legal ones.
Not for illegals. We will see what happens to legal migration, but illegal migration, most certainly, neither Europe nor America is going to be welcoming.
So that actually brings me to the second point about this briefly. There's no mention, really, no specific mention of legal migration. They agree in generic terms about mobility is required, or mobility of professionals is required, and education and skilled labor and so on. I mean, in very generic terms, the joint statement lays out some kind of acknowledgement that there needs to be some migration, but there is no specific mention of H-1B visas. Is that troubling? Is that a sign of some kind of ambiguity over this on the part of the US? Because within MAGA itself, Make America Great Again, within that lobby, there is a division between the people, between the techie groups led by Elon Musk and the others who disagree that even this skilled labor is is required in the country.
So two ways in which to interpret this from my perspective. One is that, as you rightly say, there is a full-fledged debate going on this issue. So you don't want a red flag by putting it bluntly in a joint statement. So if I was the minister or the secretary, I would be quite happy if there is an informal commitment given to me saying, we are the largest recipients of H-1B. You know this, the world knows it. And if we can maintain that position, that's fine. I don't want any guarantees in writing, especially in a joint statement. So that I wouldn't insist on that. The second thing I would say is that I think there is a view in India as well that how much political capital do you want to spend on H-1B? You made this point in response to another issue that we discussed, which is people go study in IIT, they take care of themselves, they go and the question that is now increasingly being asked in India, we don't want to stop that. By all means, go if you have to. But how much capital should the government of India spend on getting these IITians to the Silicon Valley? Because we don't know whether that is, what good does it bring to you? I'm not saying it doesn't bring any good, but I think the question is being asked as to how much political capital you should spend. But for me, I think the first point I made is valid, which is, I think if there is an informal commitment from their side that, listen, we have a debate and we will see how it goes, that's something we have to accept again. I don't get this. Why do you assume in today's world that some things haven't changed? The most important change in the West is immigration. So we will be affected. I just don't know in what way we will be affected and how much we will be affected. But we should not expect that status quo will continue and then list that status quo in a joint statement. That would be counterproductive, frankly, because you put something there and then that becomes an issue for Trump or for MAGA. I don't know. You don't want that. So if there is some kind of an understanding between the two sides, I'll be more than happy on this issue. I don't know there is. I'm just saying, in response to your question, there could have been some kind of an informal commitment or understanding saying, listen, do you really want this? I'm also not sure. I need to check on this, but you could do that after the interview. I don't think the Biden joint statement had anything on H-1B either. The last year we had, and that's the only joint statement I compared, to be honest. But somebody will have to see the last three joint statements. I don't remember seeing a H-1B reference in the Delaware summit when PM went and they had a bilateral meeting and a joint statement was issued. I don't think there was anything on H-1B either. There might have been something on immigration, I'm not sure, but nothing on H-1B.
To your point about political capital, I just want to say that for a government that has made the Indian diaspora in the world, in every country, it's an extension, really a political extension, a diplomatic extension, if you can call it that. For a government like that, to be pushed back on an issue that by governments around the world and the US right now, on an issue that hurts this diaspora, is then something of a political setback. I think that is where this question of political capital, how much political capital should we actually expend, is a question that probably the government will have to take a call on. But going ahead on this interview, what would you say were the main takeaways from this visit, and how different in form and substance? You say you compared it to the Biden joint statement during the Biden administration, the last one, the last bilateral meeting, and how different is it from the previous Trump administration?
So I think the word, the acronym, they seem to be fond of acronyms. So there are a whole lot of acronyms in the joint statement.
Yes.
But the acronym that is apt in responding to your question is perhaps compact, catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. And just a glance at the joint statement will tell you that the three priority areas were defense, commerce, and technology. I would say that in comparison to Trump 1, at least, definitely Trump 1, the leaders have said that the US would expand defense sales, and that's fine because they always seek to do that. You know that, I know that, and co-production with India. That co-production angle has got a new emphasis in my view. There has always been an emphasis on defense sales, no question. And we can talk of F-35 and the rest of it. That is the continuation that is happening from Trump 1 and Biden. I think I was keen to note co-production. And there I would say I was struck by two things. One is the Javelin anti-tank guided missiles, which both sides have undertaken to produce in India, and the Skyper infantry combat vehicles. These are specific. I would say these are commitments that you cannot just go 3-4 years without doing nothing. So at least we have commitments. We may have F-35 as well, but I was interested in co-production. The fact that the leaders are determined to explore not just US defense sales, but also co-production tells me 2 or 3 things. One, specific items are mentioned. Second, it would mean there has got to be some investment. It cannot happen without investment. And third, and that is where we have to watch carefully, how much of technology will be transferred, because I would assume that at least some technology will be transferred to India, if not 100%. So that, I think, is the main achievement as far as I'm concerned in defense. The other main achievement, if you allow me, which has gone a little bit unnoticed in the Indian press, is that the two leaders decided to break new ground and sustain overseas deployments of US and Indian militaries in the Indo-Pacific. This is as specific as it gets. I don't think we have had such a thing even from Quad or from previous visits to the US. These are specific in the sense of US-India overseas deployments, obviously joint, in Indo-Pacific. That for me is huge because traditionally, and you have followed this as much as I have, the definition of Indo-Pacific has posed a problem for India in the Indian Ocean. I think what I want to tell your audience is that since 2012 or so, there is permanent Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean. I remember attending a conference in Shanghai. If you allow me, I'd like to mention this anecdote. When a Chinese professor looked at, this was in the context of an education conference, but we were obviously talking into Sino-Indian ties and so on. He said, Professor, please remember this is Indian Ocean and not India's ocean. He made this. So I was a school debater. So for whatever it is worth, I told him, I hope you will accept, Professor, that the South China Sea is also South China Sea and not China Sea. He said, no, that is different. I said, how? How is it different? So anyway, we got into a tutu mama, if you like, and that didn't resolve anything. And between academics, in any case, you can't resolve anything. I've realized that after 7 years of being an academic, but that's fine. So what I'm saying is this emphasis on overseas deployments, this emphasis on supply of maritime patrol aircraft for specific use in the Indian Ocean, it interests me because India has struggled a little bit, if you like. Ideally, we want the Indian Ocean to be free from hegemonic presence. There can only be one hegemon. So, what we have done traditionally, getting Australia to be somewhat interested is okay, but Japan and the US are simply not. It's also a question of resources, but it's also a question of whether they are interested in the Indian Ocean. France has been our steadfast partner for Indian Ocean because France is a resident power and
Yeah.
it has real estate in the Indian Ocean, Reunion Islands, Mayotte, and all that. So this is a welcome addition. I don't think they've spelt it out, but for me, I see the Americans now saying, okay, the Indian Ocean is also important. While, of course, the Western Pacific will occupy primacy in their strategic calculus, I think they have saying that, listen, Indian Ocean, we are willing to accept that this will also be important. And to again answer your question about, I think there was another issue that you raised, which was how much of investment is going to happen? Are they just going to sell us equipment? And I'm addressing it. I think the fact that Anduril and Mahindra Group will also co-develop and co-produce maritime systems and advanced AI, that is unmanned aerial systems, that is also great for me as far as I'm concerned. So this is something I have said in my blog as well, that India will have to keep pushing because America's attention will waver. They've got other things to do. But on all these issues, I think India has to keep pushing with the private sector in the US and the government of the US to make sure that these co-production things don't lag behind the foreign military sales. Foreign military sales will happen. But I think it is incumbent on India to make sure that all the co-production things mentioned, and there are 4 or 5 things mentioned, we should pin down each one of those in the relevant sectoral dialogue that we have with them. And we are a major non-NATO ally. We've got strategic trade authorization. There is now no limit on what they can transfer. So really, it is incumbent on us to make sure that foreign military sales is more than balanced by development and co-production in India. I'm optimistic we can do it if they implement the joint statement fully and faithfully. We have now become a full-fledged member of
Yes.
the Combined Maritime Force. When you mention Houthi, the anti-piracy task force is what we are part of. And that I think you are quite right. We do independent patrols in coordination with the Americans. But I think when they say break new ground and sustain overseas deployments of US and Indian militaries in the Indo-Pacific, I am dying to see what is meant by that. It's not immediate. I don't think this can be combined maritime forces. This is talking of Indian and US military deployment in the Indo-Pacific, and these are overseas deployments, obviously. So we'll have to wait and see. But if that happens in the Indo-Pacific and especially in the Indian Ocean, I'm happy because that is an area, and I'm putting it to you quite bluntly, we simply do not have the naval firepower to dominate the Indian Ocean. As you know, the Navy receives the third funding after the Army and the Air Force. So we are not capable of doing it. We need external balancing. We need other powers. France helps us. And if US can also help us, I see our hand being strengthened in the Indian Ocean. That's all I'm saying.
So how does that play with our own relations with China, as well as what Trump has been saying on China? At the press conference, he was very effusive, if I may say, about his earlier relationship with President Xi Jinping. He said we used to have a really good relationship, and then COVID happened, and then he expressed this whole desire to, that China should mediate should help end the war in Ukraine, and that he would mediate between India and China. And then there's this commitment to Quad. I mean, the renewed commitment to Quad, as you mentioned in the joint statement. So all this mixed messaging, how is it going to help India, if at all, in its relations with China, where you have achieved a kind of a détente, if I may call it that? I don't know if it's too big a word, but here we are trying to mend relations with China, and here's this new security dimension that has been brought in. So how will that play out?
So that's a tough question to answer, because we don't know how Trump is going to deal with China. Frankly, I don't know. That has not played itself out. But let me make two broad points. One is that Trump's relationship with Russia, as it is evolving, it enhances India's strategic space. No question about it. Whatever happens, it's clear to me that that will enhance India's strategic space in terms of whatever we are doing. There will be less pressure on us to do this and do that and so on. However, as you rightly hint, how Trump deals with China will have a very profound impact on India's strategic options. So there are three possible outcomes, and obviously each outcome will impinge on India's strategic space differently. One outcome is that Trump himself is he's giving out very mixed messaging, but he's got so many China hawks, and he's going to proceed with the tariff war. And then that can very quickly deteriorate. And you have seen the recent incident of the American State Department webpage, which does not make a reference to America not supporting the independence of Taiwan. This has been removed, and China has objected very vehemently, saying that this is not on because you're changing. So I see one option, which is that relations between US and China will get much worse before they get better, and that by definition will strengthen relationship also with India, not because India sees it in that sense, but there is a good part of the US which sees India only in the prism of their ties with China, the State Department, and whatever else you call it, deep state or whatever. So that is one possibility. The second possibility is just status quo, which is they both keep sparring. There is no chance of a grand bargain, and therefore we continue. So this too will not make a very big difference to India's strategic space, and we continue like nothing happened. The third possibility is the one which could worry India, because supposing there is a grand bargain, and if you ask me what is a grand bargain today, I'm sticking my neck out. I'm not saying this will necessarily be true. The grand bargain I can think of, which I've hinted in my blog, is that we have three different spheres of influence, with the US definitely wanting to dominate the Western Hemisphere and the Western Pacific, leaving Russia its own sphere of influence in parts of Europe, which is to be decided by the negotiations, and we will see how that turns out, with China having its own sphere of influence in East Asia.
So
now,
G3.
So
G3.
Correct. So South Asia, I have argued, is not important enough for either of these three big powers, frankly. So they are quite happy to leave it. But I have said that if China gets its own sphere of influence and accepts it, that will in itself create massive détente between US and China. It leaves China with an opportunity to be assertive on our border and to be assertive in our neighborhood. So I would say the third option, where there is whatever the grand bargain is, if it is not spheres of influence, it could be something else. So I can guess your question, or I can read your mind. What does India do? I think India will then have no choice except to take, I wouldn't go as far as to call it détente, you're quite right. I would call it a thaw in the relationship between India and China. We will have to now do strategic hedging, keep our options open. You take the thaw forward to the extent you can. You see, I was attending a conference in Jaipur, and there was a Chinese gentleman who was speaking virtually. And I had expressed my frustration with 22 rounds of special representatives talks and nothing happening on the border. He said, interestingly, that that is not true. We have settled our border with every other country except India, land border. I said, that is precisely my point. You have chosen not to settle the land border with India because you want to keep India off balance, off guard. You don't want India to really feel happy in its space so we can do other things. So I argue, of course, he wouldn't agree, but I argued that it is deliberate policy of the government of China to not settle the border issue, keep the pot stirring, as it were, so that they can have options. So anyway, I think notwithstanding that, if the third option happens, right now there is no indication, because you are right. He keeps saying, my friend Xi, but that does not result. If you have to look at the actions of Trump, not at the words when it comes to China. I think you'll have to see what he does in actual practice. And if that happens, then I think India's strategic space, which it gains because of Russia's improvement of ties with US, may get cancelled because of US rapprochement with China. We will see. And in which case, we will have no choice except to hedge our bets by, of course, quadrilateral will remain. I still think there will be a distinction between the maritime sphere and the land border. Our problem will be the land border. I think the maritime space, it's very clear to me that quadrilateral, security dialogue, there is solid commitment from the Trump administration. He has openly said, I'm the one who made the Quad, to the summit level. That's what he has said in a press conference. He said, I'm the one who upgraded it to summit level. And I'm quite happy for the quadrilateral to continue to do. And I've also, last point, if you allow me, I think it is wrong to say the quadrilateral grouping is not a security grouping. I have argued that this is non-traditional security. It's not guns, it's not artillery, it's not tanks. But everything else the quadrilateral security grouping does, which is public health security, climate security, energy security, cyber security. If that is not security in today's age, what is security? Why are we, some countries still say it's a diplomatic grouping. It's not a security grouping. I think it's a security grouping. Only thing is, it's non-traditional security. And in today's world, I would argue, notwithstanding Ukraine and Gaza, it is non-traditional security that's vital for countries like India. What if there was a cyber attack and your whole system goes for a six? What happens to undersea cables, fiber optic cables? Those are all part of what Quad is doing. And I think that's fantastic from India's perspective, that we have a grouping which is taking care of non-traditional security, where I would say India is rather weak. So that is an area where I think quadrilateral cooperation will be important for us.
So when you say, just an observation, this one, that when you say that, the maritime and the land border are two separate things, our maritime involvement in Quad and the land border. But we are the only ones with the land border. So our deepening involvement in the maritime sphere of the Quad could lead to problems on a land border. You talked about the delays and so on. I recall reading an interview with Kissinger in the Wall Street Journal, I think 2 years ago, where he said, there's if we don't win this game, if we don't remain the sole superpower, it's going to be a G2 situation, and countries like India will just become vassal states. In which case, it brings me to the other thing, which is we won't need the F-35s that the US is trying to strong arm us into buying. Trump said at the press conference that we're going to do billions and billions of sales, dollars worth of sale to India of defense equipment. And this is going to pave the way for the sale of the F-35s. You were ambassador to France when the Rafale deal was concluded in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, 17 or 18. And how do you see the F-35 fitting in to what our defense needs are, what our thinking is about, how diverse can our aircraft get, all those issues, and then but just the sheer cost of 100 million a piece. If you buy 114, that's going to be, upward of $1 billion. So where is all this heading actually?
So look, we've, I think, conveyed to France, and I'm very sure, I know we have conveyed to France, but I can't say whether we have conveyed to the US, that in the medium to long term, just a buyer-seller relationship is not sustainable. You're quite right. These are expensive. But if you ask your ultimate clients and consumers, they are arguing we are massively short of aircrafts. That's the problem. You talk to somebody in the Indian Air Force, they will say, please buy everything. We need it. Now, whether it is exaggerated or not, I don't know. I would like to take them at face value. And they talk of, really the need for, I don't know, 5, 6 battalions more and so on. So viewed from that perspective, subject to whether we can afford it, and I'm not in a position to say that, I don't know how much of funds is available, I think this is not a bad thing. And I'm always of the view that neither should we put all our eggs in the American basket, nor should we put all our eggs in the French basket. It's good to have options. That's one. The second thing I would say is that if in parallel, they can give us a way out of producing these things eventually, then I think that is good. For example, one of the discussions, the trilaterals have become very important, Nirupama. The France, UAE, India, France, Australia, India. And I also see a very, very important statement, which again has gone unnoticed, which is that both India and the US have said we need plurilateral partnerships, and we will look at those partnerships in the context of Indo-Pacific. I like that because for Rafale, for example, I have made a proposal it was obviously track 2. I was not ambassador. I'm no longer ambassador. So it was in Abu Dhabi, and I made a point that perhaps UAE can provide the capital and France can provide the technology, and we make the Rafale in India, not just for the Indian Air Force, but for UAE, which is a big consumer of Rafale. Qatar is a big consumer of Rafale. Egypt is a big consumer of Rafale. So I have floated this idea. There is no opposition, but obviously, these things have to be fleshed out. But I said that, listen, if there is a meeting of mind on security and we are forming a trilateral grouping, maybe we should do that. I think that is the way out, even with regard to US. And with US, I would argue a trilateral grouping between US, Saudi, and India. That would, or even Qatar for that matter, because the biggest American Air Force base is in Qatar, but Saudi certainly, and they need these, aircrafts and so on. So we will have to think of innovative arrangements. I don't think the Americans are so naive that they believe we can buy 300 F-35. They know how much money you have. Come on, it's not like they don't know. So I think we will have to think of innovative ideas, public-private partnership, triangular or trilateral cooperation, to make sure that we try to get technology transfer. Now, whether this can happen or not is something we will have to wait and see. But as I said, I do see some optimistic things in the joint statement about co-development and co-production. I hope we will be able to push it as much as the sale of, as you say, F-35 and other things which will happen from US to India. I think at some point we will have to sit down and tell them that, listen, we need this to be made in India. We must have made that point already. To the French, they know it very well. But I think with Americans as well, we would have made that point, and we have to really move from a buyer-seller relationship to an investor-investee relationship in defense. That's a bit of a challenge, but I think it's doable. If you see the way the world is changing, the Americans will also be interested in a long-term defense relationship with India. I don't think you can be content with just selling 10 F-35s. What for? Ultimately, you need to have a relationship with India that is long-term and sustainable. So I believe there are some interesting ways in which the issue can be tackled. But you raise an important issue. I agree that in the medium to long term, you cannot carry on like this, just a buyer-seller relationship, and that will be difficult for India.
So one of the, the other area of concern, of course, is the Trump administration's tariffs threat. And even at this, during this visit with Prime Minister Modi by his side, he spoke at the press conference about, how bad India is about tariffs. They do 30, 40, even 70%. And, we're going to do reciprocal, and it's not personal against India. It's a principle, and we're doing it to Europe as well, and so on. At the same time, you have this agreement to hammer out a new bilateral trade treaty, a free trade treaty. It's called Mission 500, meaning to take bilateral trade to $500 billion. This really means that India will be buying more from the US now than it has done so far, because the deficit, the trade deficit in the bilateral trade is against the US, and Trump doesn't like that, and therefore we have to buy more from them. Trump has already said that the current deficit can be offset by purchases of LNG and and maybe some other things. But when we look at what the deliverables on trade are in this Mission 500, what sectors in India do you think might get affected? Is it going to be pharmaceuticals? Is it going to be agriculture? What is going to get hit? And who should be watching out now for?
So we should.
And this has got quite a short window. I think we have to have some kind of draft ready to discuss when Trump probably comes here for the Quad Summit in October this year.
So I think this is an important issue, and I will not conceal from you that it has every potential of becoming a bone of contention between the two countries. I think we have managed it well, but it's important to understand a few basics. One, there is an American Reciprocal Trade Tariff Act of 1934, I think, or some, that is normally has been used in America to reduce tariffs and lower protectionist barriers and get other countries to reduce tariffs. Mr. Trump, as is his wont, is making this act stand on its head and is going to use the same act to increase tariffs. By the way, I must tell you very frankly that in the US, a strict reading of the American Constitution, only the Congress can do this. So this needs to pass muster, and there could be some legal challenges, but be that as it may, we will assume that Trump's tariffs, whatever he proposes, will stay. So that's the first. The total bilateral trade as of now is $190 billion. The Indian surplus is a mere 50 billion. Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, you buy something for 50 billion, you are in the clear. After that, nobody. So exactly. Energy, whole lot of other things. So you are in the clear. So that is one part of it. Just for your viewers to get an idea, our tariffs simple average is 17%. As against 3.3% of the US. However, India's exports, which are traditionally textiles, garments, footwear, they face 15% tariffs in America. They don't face 3%. 3% is the average. but these are tariff peaks. So we do have some margin for maneuver. If we are reducing, we can tell him, listen, then the 15% is also, we don't charge that much. So that is one thing we can argue with them. We have some leeway. I think the sectors which are most likely to be affected, this was your question. One is pharma, the generic pharmaceutical products, and we are the largest generic pharmaceutical exporter to the
The
US.
world depends on our generic
Generic
pharmaceutical
pharma.
industry. And
Generic
if
pharma.
that is
Yes.
going to get hit, it's going to be a blow for the whole world.
I will deal
Even for
with it
Americans.
presently. I will deal with it presently. Second is textiles and garments. And the third is steel. These are the three sectors to watch for. I put it to you that pharma will be the most difficult one for Trump to touch because Mr. Elon Musk and others, as part of this DOGE, are trying to reduce the cost of American government. Their healthcare system, some people argue, is highly dependent on generic pharmaceuticals from India. So I do not see the pharmaceuticals being hit with a tremendous duty. That's my first point, because there is a certain dependence there. Cost of living is involved, medicines are involved. So I think that's the first point.
You
However,
underestimate the power of money on the Trump administration.
no, even the power of money.
What
See,
millions?
so Nirupama, why do you think he gave them a 30-day reprieve to Mexico and Canada? The stocks reacted negatively. So if the Wall Street stocks react negatively, then nobody cares about money. The only reason why Mexico and Canada have been given a reprieve is that the stocks reacted very badly. And the moment he said 30 days, the stocks rebounded. He is a person who believes ultimately the stock market and the inflation. This is what an American negotiator was telling me in Jaipur 3 days ago, that listen, he has got a 2-year window because we will see what happens in the midterm elections. But before that, he says the one thing that he cannot afford is inflation. So I think we will be okay on pharma. Textiles, I am not so sure at all, because that is a problem. And we will have to wait and see what happens to textiles and garments. There are people here who feel that even an imposition of 2 or 3%, we will be able to survive in the American market. Unlike the EU market, where Vietnam exports textiles at 0%, and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh have got concessions, American market, India is broadly fine. So we may be able to survive. Having said that, two areas where I have serious concern. One is agriculture, where the Americans have a duty of 4% or thereabouts on agriculture products entering America. India has 39% tariff, which is actually an average. So in some cases, it can be more. Agriculture is an area which will be difficult for any government in India to handle. So we will have to get a carve out. Otherwise, we will simply have to accept the reciprocal tariffs which have been imposed on agriculture. So agriculture is a problem. Second would be in areas like steel. It's not the big steel manufacturers who are a problem because they can handle it. I think it is the small and medium enterprises where a lot of steel is also manufactured in India. In the small and medium enterprises, they will find it very difficult. That goes also for your carbon border adjustment mechanism by the EU, but that's a different story. The EU's threat to impose a carbon border adjustment mechanism on Indian steel will not affect the big steel manufacturers so much. They will adjust, but it is a small and medium. So I have two concerns. One is agriculture, where I think we need a carve out because agriculture has become ag reform. I thought the farm bill brought by the government was eminently sensible, but a few hundred farmers from Punjab and Haryana, wherever, they are able to frankly, hold the country ransom. It's not as if the whole country rose against the farm bill, isn't it? So there is a reluctance to move from crops like rice and wheat in Punjab to cash crops for a variety of reasons. And I think Ashok Gulati has written extensively about this in Indian Express and other papers. So anyway, there is a lot of literature. But agriculture is an area that will be difficult to handle for the government because it's a sensitive subject. It's always been sensitive. And the other one would be small and medium entrepreneurs. So we will have to see what happens to the tariff thing. I want to de-link this issue, though, with the idea of Mission 500. Mission 500 is about reaching 500 billion bilateral trade by 2030. And frankly, even if my exports go up from let us say 150, 180 today to 250, I'm happy. What he wants is balance, then it must be 250 because Mission 500 2030 250 billion imports and 250 billion exports. Let's assume that current trade is 190 and there is a trade surplus for India for 50. I'm okay if it is 250 because my exports to America will still have to rise. So that's the way I see it. I still think this business of getting equality with every country goes against the principles which were laid out by Adam Smith, and it's not sustainable. But anyway, we are in that world now where
I mean, the whole point of WTO and was this, right? I mean that tariffs can't be unilateral and they have to be negotiated, and then there's carve-outs for less developed or developing countries. So in that sense, he's taking a hatchet to all of that. But India, by if I may say so, by sort of meekly agreeing that okay, all this is kosher and we'll do what you want, is also sort of letting go of its leadership in this respect, right? I mean, as the leader, as an aspiring leader, or as a leader of the global South, you ought to be making a little more noise about this, isn't it? I mean, you're just hoping that nothing will happen to you, that you're so scared of speaking out that Mr. Modi can't even say anything while Trump actually denounces India right in front of him.
Now, I respectfully disagree because China with 18% of world trade is not able to do anything. You with your 2% of share of world trade want us to speak loudly? I mean, this is not UN. UN, you can say what you want. You can say you are the world's largest democracy, the biggest country. In trade, please understand, the only thing that matters is the color of money. We are a mere 2% of global trade and 3% in services. It is abysmally low for a country like India. I would say that, and I have said that. With 2% world trade, you want me to gather together the global South and argue against Trump? That would be very foolish. Look at what China is doing. They are the ones who should be arguing against it. But China in the Trump 1 administration, whenever it got slapped duties, they went ahead, violated WTO and slapped reciprocal duties. That is what every country is going to do. So your question about what is happening to the WTO, my simple answer is, I think we are seeing the end of the WTO in its current form. I'm not saying the WTO will be finished, so I'm choosing my words carefully. WTO as we know it is finished. And what do I mean by as we know it? Trade hitherto, international trade hitherto, has been MFN based, most favored nation. What is most favored nation? Exact opposite of what Mr. Trump is proposing now, because there is only one MFN rate that America is allowed to have. Let's assume that America says, I want a 5% duty on ethanol coming into US. That 5% will apply to Brazil, it will apply to India, it will apply to any country in Africa. What he is proposing now is country by country, the tariffs are going to be different. It is the very antithesis of MFN as we know it. This has been happening for some time. I'm not saying Trump is the one who started all this. I think it began long back. And then now the major players, that is US, EU, China, for me, are the major players of the trading system. You could also include Japan. And in many ways, India could figure in the top 10 as well. But anyway, the major players are US, EU, China. If they decide that Trump's tariffs will be met by reciprocal tariffs from their side, then I think the MFN structure is finished and trade is becoming non-MFN, reciprocal, and strategic. In the sense that Mr. Trump conceivably could have lesser tariffs on India than China, because China is a much bigger player and a bigger threat. Similarly, he could argue between Mexico and India, I find Mexico more problematic because there is illegal immigration from Mexico. So I want to impose higher duties. I don't know. I'm just saying hypothetically. So if you do that, then I agree with you, you're taking a wrecking ball to the basic structure of WTO, and that will be finished. What will then happen? I mean, I think it's worthwhile for your audience to know that Robert Lighthizer, who was the former USTR under Trump 1, wrote a very, very interesting article in New York Times. And he explained free trade from his perspective. And he articulates a vision. It's a very interesting vision. I don't know how feasible it is. He says all democracies should have a particular tariff among themselves, and then have an external tariff which applies to non-democratic states, which is China, Russia, North Korea, whatever. This is, I mean, it sounds a little bit of an outlier idea or an outlandish idea, but that is the idea. I want to say finally on WTO, that WTO is supposed to be carrying out three functions: dispute settlement function, negotiating function, and trade monitoring function. It is failing abysmally in all three. There has been no negotiating agreement out of WTO other than fishery subsidies since I left WTO in 2001 after Doha. We are talking 24 years now. Nothing. On dispute settlement, it is Barack Obama who started it, ironically, by saying we will not renew the membership of the appellate body member who finishes term. One by one, US has single-handedly blocked the renewal of appellate body members. So the appellate body today is bereft of members. So it's finished. There is only one level of the dispute settlement system that functions, which is the panel system. Panelists comprise people like me who know WTO. So I've done 18 panels. So, we try to rule, saying that in this particular case, US is right, Brazil was wrong. And then Brazil has a right to say, I'm going to appeal this decision, but there is no appellate body to appeal. So the dispute settlement function of the WTO is gone. As far as trade monitoring is concerned, it's becoming very difficult because trade monitoring depends on the voluntary nature of submissions by members. China's system is so opaque that there is no way of knowing where China is giving subsidies, to whom it is giving subsidies. So trade monitoring function also is failing relatively. So with these three, I'm going to stick my neck out and say that what is sought to be done by some major players in the WTO, India is not part of it, is to have a new kind of WTO, which will not be plurilateral. It'll be, multilateral. It'll be plurilateral. It will not be MFN. It'll be non-MFN, and which will be based more or less on reciprocity. So it will affect countries like India, which, as you rightly said in your opening remarks, as a developing country, we were entitled to special and differential treatment, which means a certain degree of non-reciprocity. You as a rich country may want to reduce tariffs from 20 to 10. You can't expect me to go from 40% to 0% overnight. You will have to allow me to go from 40 to 30, 30 to 20, and 20 to 10 over a period of 10 years. That is what special and differential treatment is all. That, I think, will be finished as well. So we are looking at the dawn of a new organization. This is not going to be a multilateral trading system. It's going to be a plurilateral trading system, of which whether India wants to be part of it or not is a larger decision. The government of India will have to take a call.
So just Two questions, two quick questions, because we have really crossed our time limit. One is, as you mentioned in you do a very nice blog, I must say, and in that you mentioned that the joint statement lacks any mention of India's, UN aspirations, UN Security Council aspirations. There's no mention of UN Security Council reforms, and that is probably because Trump himself has no big love for the UN. So where is that going from here? Where does India have to shelve that for now and wait another 4 years to get another sympathetic year from the US?
So we have two choices to make, and I have come up with an outlandish idea, which I'm happy to share on your forum. The first idea, as you rightly say, is waiting for Godot, as I say. I call it the waiting for Godot option. Keep waiting. You've waited from 2005 or even before, actually. If you ask people like Ambassador T.P. Srinivasan, they'll tell you it started in 1979. Anyway, we have waited long enough. You continue to wait. I have suggested, it's an outlandish idea, I'm the first to admit it, that India must start with a few like-minded countries in the West. And there is a reason I say West. And establish an international peace and security forum. We will not call it the UN. We will call it an international peace and security forum. For now, my membership, which is open-ended, would be US, EU, India. I would include UAE and Saudi, and I would include Japan and Australia. This is my membership where we get together and at least start discussing the major security issues of war and peace. Now, by mentioning war and peace, my way of signaling is to tell the world that the UNSC is dead for various reasons. And there are some countries like China, but also others, which oppose vehemently India's membership of the UN Security Council. You know that. So if we can convince the Trump administration, if not post-Trump, but I think there is now a case for setting up a forum de novo, because the UN is, I think, is incapable of reform. There will always be some coffee club and uniting for consensus. There will always be a problem between Nigeria, South Africa. Now Egypt has thrown its hat into the ring. So Africa group is unable to make up its mind. Always there will be issues. So I think India should start a very, very informal forum of international peace and security. I only made this proposal, by the way, 3 days ago. So you are the second forum in which I made this proposal in Jaipur 3 days ago. I genuinely think there is nothing to be lost. As you rightly say, what is the alternative for India? Keep waiting. And that doesn't make sense to me. You keep your claims in the UN and do whatever you like. But I think if we start this, countries will start taking note that, okay, something is happening. And I think we should keep it open-ended and decide which are the players you want it to be, and start by discussing the common problems of security in the world. There are enough problems to discuss, isn't it? So I would, easier said than done for me. I'm retired. I'm not part of government. So I'm appreciative of all the difficulties that we will have. But if you can get 5 players, US, EU, India, maybe Japan, Australia, you will suddenly see traction will gain. I'm 100% sure there will be traction. But getting these players is a lot of convincing that India has to do. But Japan, I think, will see merit, because Japan is also excluded. Maybe we should think of including Brazil as well, and Germany as well. So then we can see how where it goes. But start doing something. I think enough of just beating our chest and saying nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Why, if nothing is happening, why do you want to have anything to do with the UN? It's fine. You do what you have to do. But I think we should seriously start thinking of alternatives now.
That's a very bold and very imaginative idea, if I may say so, and in these uncertain times as well. So, which I really want to end this very interesting discussion with one last question, and that is about this. this very odd moment during the visit, which was a meeting between Elon Musk and Prime Minister Modi. There was a full delegation on the Indian side, the NSA, the foreign minister, the foreign secretary, the ambassador, and so many others. And on the Musk side, it was family, kids, partner, and nanny. As an Indian diplomat who served India for 40 years or so, what does that image say to you? To me personally, it spoke of this huge power differential that India has with America, with even an American billionaire who now seems to be running the show in that country. How did it look to you? Did you ever encounter something like this in your years of service?
No, look, I think I have sat in on meetings with Bill Gates at the COP21 meeting. There is no comparison between Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Bill Gates is fundamentally a polite person and so on and so forth, but that was not very different as well. What I want to say is as follows. I would say, with due respect, this is more a reflection of the American ethos than the Indian ethos. That is one. I don't think there was any disrespect meant. Elon Musk himself is going through a power struggle, if you like. Vivek Ramaswamy left him. He is now the only person who calls the shots on DOG. I'm also unclear as to whether he met Prime Minister Modi in his capacity as DOG or as Elon Musk of Tesla. This is where we
Which
have.
is why that whole delegation on our side,
Yes.
they're looking a bit uncomfortable as well, because
No. I agree with you.
Yes.
The optics looks strange, but I'm only saying that reflects badly, or it reflects on the American ethos, not on the Indian ethos. We have to come ready for all discussions. If he decides to come with his kids and nanny, that is his prerogative. So that is one. The second, I think, is also that there is a bit of a power struggle going on there as well. I mean, I don't think Trump would have liked very much the image of Elon Musk on the cover of the Time magazine, for example. So there is that to keep in mind. My sense would be that we were fully prepared to discuss Tesla. It couldn't have been about DOG, because frankly, what have we got to do with DOG?
That's
Nothing
their
at all.
internal stuff.
It is there absolutely. So that, I think, maybe he didn't want to discuss Tesla. That's one way of looking at it. And he has couched it by bringing his kids and basically saying, I'm making a polite, courtesy call on the Indian PM. That is his prerogative.
The Starlink as well, which is now
Starlink as well.
And Bangladesh.
Correct.
And
So
Myanmar.
I think it's more a reflection of American ethos. It's informality, if you like. I don't know. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. First time I went for a meeting in DC at the invitation of the USTR, a big WTO delegation. There would be a coffee break, and then the Americans would promptly disappear. So I was waiting for a coffee like an idiot for the first time. And somebody came and said, sir, there is a coffee machine. Please go use your $1, $2 coins and take a cup of coffee. We would never do this in India. We would ply them with samosas and doklas and coffee and food. There is a difference in ethos, Nirupama. I genuinely think there was no disrespect meant, but the difference in ethos and the ecosystem is so different. Certainly no Indian industrialist would have gone with his children or something, but for them, that's a big deal. Don't forget, he carried his child on his shoulders very recently, even for a Senate meeting or whatever. So it's not the first time he's doing it. I mean, that is, again, the importance given to the second lady, the first lady, those kind of things are, I think, this part of the American ethos. We will simply have to accept it. But I will concede to you that it took me also by surprise. I'm sure the Indian delegation was also surprised. Thank you very much.
With that, thank you so much for this very interesting conversations. It was longer than we planned, but it was very interesting. And You brought fascinating insights into this from your own experience. Thank you so much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Nirupama Subramanian. Always a pleasure.
Frontline Conversations. Leading the debate since 1984.